staying in an Airbnb can be an exciting experience. Whether you're in a remote cabin, a luxurious home, or a cozy apartment, it's often a chance to escape the routine and create new memories. But what happens when that feeling of escape turns into isolation? When the charm of the unfamiliar becomes unsettling, and the comfort of privacy is replaced by the gut-wrenching sensation of being watched? The following stories come from people who rented Airbnbs during the holidays, seeking relaxation and peace, but instead found themselves in terrifying situations. Each of these accounts serves as a reminder: sometimes, it's not just the creaks of an old house or the wind rattling the windows that keep you up at night. Sometimes, it's something or someone else. Story 1: The Airbnb Stalker During the Holidays. Last December, I decided to book an Airbnb house to spend New Year's Eve in a peaceful location, away from the city's hustle and bustle. After researching several options, I chose a house situated in a rural area, surrounded by forests with breathtaking mountain views. The photos in the listing showed a cozy residence with 2 bedrooms, a spacious living room, and a balcony perfect for enjoying the scenery. Communication with the host was swift and efficient. He seemed friendly and helpful, answering all my questions about the area and the house's amenities. However, I noticed that some of the photos were outdated, but I decided it wouldn't be a major issue. On the first day, everything went smoothly. I arrived at the house in the afternoon and was warmly greeted by the host, who handed me the keys and showed me around the property. The house was exactly as depicted in the photos, perhaps even more charming. I spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the surroundings and settling in. On New Year's Eve, I prepared a simple dinner in the house's well-equipped kitchen. After dinner, I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine to watch the fireworks that were set to go off in the nearby town. As I admired the colorful lights illuminating the night sky, I felt a strange presence. Initially, I thought it was just my imagination, but upon looking towards the surrounding forest, I noticed subtle movements among the trees. I assumed it could be a wild animal or perhaps other guests of the house, but the feeling of being watched persisted. I decided not to pay much attention and tried to relax, but the discomfort kept growing. The next morning, I woke up early to enjoy the day. During breakfast, I noticed that the host was absent, which was unusual since he was typically available for any needs. I felt a bit concerned but decided he might be busy with other responsibilities. While exploring the property, I noticed strange footprints in the garden that didn't match any animal I was familiar with. They looked human but were too thin to belong to an ordinary person. This made me uneasy, but I decided not to worry too much. That night, something even more disturbing happened. I heard footsteps outside the house, nearby. I thought maybe the host was returning earlier than expected, but there was no sign of him. The footsteps stopped abruptly, and a deafening silence took over the night. I looked through the living room window and saw a hooded figure watching the house from a considerable distance. My heart raced, and a sense of panic began to take hold. I tried calling the host, but my phone had no signal on the property. I attempted to use my cell phone, but couldn't connect to the internet. I was stuck in the house, not knowing what to do. The hooded figure continued to watch, slowly moving through the trees as if searching every corner of the property. The next morning, after a sleepless and fearful night, I decided to take a walk to the nearest town to try and contact the host. When I arrived, I discovered that the host had canceled all reservations without prior notice due to personal issues. I called him multiple times, but none of my attempts received a response. I returned to the house the next day, finding it locked from the inside. Without a spare key and no contact with the host, I was trapped on the property. It was then I realized someone had changed the locks, preventing me from entering. I tried forcing the door, but to no avail. During the following days, I remained trapped in the house, unable to leave and with no one to help. The nights were the worst, with the hooded figure continuing to surveil the property. On one such night, I heard someone walking on the house roof, silently gliding over me. The fear became unbearable. Finally, after a week of torment, I managed to find an alternative route to leave the property during the day when the surveillance seemed to lessen. I ran through the forest, guided only by daylight, and reached the nearest town without further incidents. After this horrifying experience, I reported it to the local authorities, but without concrete evidence, there was little they could do. Since then, I've avoided renting isolated properties on Airbnb, fearing a repeat of that dreadful ordeal. Story 2: The Stranger in the Guest Room. Last year, my wife and I decided to do something different for the end-of-year holidays. Instead of spending time with family or attending New Year's Eve parties, we opted to rent a secluded Airbnb in a small, quiet town. We wanted a peaceful escape, just the two of us, to reflect on the past year and recharge for the next. The house we chose was a beautiful, older home with rustic charm, set at the edge of a dense forest. It had 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a cozy living room with a fireplace. The listing boasted total privacy, which was exactly what we were looking for. The reviews were all positive, although a couple of them mentioned hearing noises at night. I dismissed those as normal creaks from an older house settling. We arrived late in the afternoon on December 30th. The sun was already setting, casting long shadows across the property. The house was even better than we expected, warm, inviting, and filled with natural light. After unpacking, we spent the evening by the fireplace, drinking wine and playing cards. It felt perfect, until the first odd occurrence. Around midnight, I heard faint footsteps upstairs. At first, I thought it might be an animal on the roof or perhaps the house creaking in the wind. But as I listened more closely, I realized the sounds were distinct. They weren't random noises, they were deliberate, slow footsteps, moving from one end of the upstairs hallway to the other. My wife noticed my unease and asked what was wrong. I shrugged it off, joking that the house might be haunted. She laughed, but I could tell she was unsettled too. I went upstairs to check it out, armed with nothing but my phone's flashlight. The hallway was empty, and all the doors were shut, just as we had left them. I checked each room thoroughly, nothing seemed out of place. The next day, we decided to explore the small town nearby. It was charming, with a few quaint shops and a cafe where we had lunch. We mentioned to the cafe owner that we were staying at the old house by the forest. She paused for a moment, then said, "Oh, that place? It's lovely, but people don't usually stay there long." When we pressed her for more details, she just smiled politely and changed the subject. That evening, as we were settling in for the night, things took a more sinister turn. My wife went upstairs to grab a blanket from one of the guest rooms. She came back downstairs looking pale. "Did you leave the closet door open?" she asked. I hadn't. She explained that when she entered the room, the closet door was slightly ajar. We were sure we had closed all the doors when we arrived. I went upstairs to check it out. The closet was empty, but something about the way the door was left open, a narrow crack, as if someone had been watching from inside, sent a shiver down my spine. Later that night, while lying in bed, we both heard it again, footsteps. This time, they were louder, more deliberate, and definitely coming from inside the house. I grabbed a kitchen knife and whispered for my wife to stay put. As I stepped into the hallway, I noticed something chilling. The guest room door, which we had closed earlier, was now wide open. I crept towards the room, every step filled with dread. When I peeked inside, the closet door was open again. My heart was pounding so loudly that I could barely hear anything else. I turned on the light and scanned the room. It was empty, but the unsettling feeling of being watched was overwhelming. We didn't sleep much that night. Every little sound set us on edge. Around 3 a.m., we heard what sounded like faint whispering, coming from somewhere downstairs. It was too quiet to make out words, but it was unmistakably human. By morning, we decided to cut our trip short. As we were packing, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. On the dusty floor of the guest room closet, there were faint footprints, barefoot, adult-sized. We left the house as quickly as possible and reported the incident to Airbnb. They said they would investigate, but we never received any follow-up. To this day, we don't know if someone was living in that house or if it was something else entirely. All I know is that I'll never stay in an isolated Airbnb again. Story 3: the shadow in the backyard. 2 years ago, I decided to rent an Airbnb for New Year's Eve with a group of close friends. We wanted a change from the usual crowded parties, so we booked a large house on the outskirts of a quiet town. The house had a modern design with big glass windows, a spacious backyard, and a hot tub. It seemed perfect for a relaxing getaway. We arrived on December 30th, late in the evening. The host had left the keys in a lockbox, along with a welcome note and instructions for the property. The house looked even better in person. It was cozy, clean, and equipped with everything we needed for a comfortable stay. We spent the first night settling in, cooking dinner, and hanging out in the hot tub. The first strange thing happened the next morning. One of my friends, Sarah, mentioned that she thought she saw someone standing by the tree line in the backyard around midnight. She brushed it off, thinking it was just her imagination, but we all joked about it, calling her paranoid. That night, things got weirder. While we were watching a movie in the living room, the motion-activated porch light turned on. We paused the movie, assuming it was just an animal, but when we looked outside, we saw nothing. Then it happened again. And again. Every few minutes, the light would flicker on, but no one was there. We started to get uneasy. One of my friends suggested it might be a faulty sensor, but it didn't explain the growing feeling that we were being watched. Later that night, around 1 a.m., we decided to call it a night and head to bed. The house had 4 bedrooms, so we all had our own space. My room faced the backyard, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there. I closed the curtains tightly and tried to sleep. Around 2:30 a.m., I was jolted awake by a soft tapping sound. It was coming from the window. My heart raced as I sat up, straining to hear. The tapping continued, slow, deliberate, and unnervingly close. I didn't dare open the curtains. Instead, I grabbed my phone and texted my friends in the other rooms. "Is anyone awake? I hear something outside my window." Within seconds, Sarah replied, "I hear it too." Another friend, Mark, responded, "Check the cameras. I'm coming to your room." The house had a small security system with outdoor cameras that connected to the host's app. We opened the app on my phone and scanned the live feeds. At first, everything seemed normal, just a dark, empty yard. But then, on the camera facing the side of the house, we saw movement. A figure, dressed in dark clothing, was walking slowly along the side of the house, heading toward the backyard. We froze, watching in disbelief. The figure stopped at the edge of the yard and turned, as if looking directly at the camera. Then it disappeared into the shadows. Mark grabbed a kitchen knife, and we all gathered in the living room, too afraid to stay in our rooms alone. We debated whether to call the police, but since the person hadn't tried to enter the house, we weren't sure if they would take it seriously. Instead, we locked all the doors and windows, turned off the lights, and waited. The rest of the night was tense. Every sound, every creak, felt like a potential threat. Around 5 a.m., we finally decided to pack our things and leave as soon as the sun came up. As we were loading the car, Sarah let out a gasp. On the frost-covered grass in the backyard, there were footprints, barefoot, leading from the tree line to the side of the house. We drove straight home and reported the incident to Airbnb and the local authorities. The host claimed they had never experienced anything like this before and promised to investigate. To this day, we don't know who that person was or what they wanted. All I know is that I'll never forget the way they looked at the camera before vanishing into the darkness. Staying in a stranger's home always carries a sense of risk. While most trips go without incident, stories like these remind us of the unsettling possibilities that come with renting an unfamiliar place. Maybe it's the vulnerability of being far from home or the realization that not every locked door guarantees safety. So, the next time you book an Airbnb, take a moment to double-check the locks, inspect the surroundings, and trust your instincts. Because while most nightmares end when you wake up, some are waiting for you in places where you least expect them.